Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pinecker, and before we get started, I just want to remind you that this month's book drawing is a preparatory redemption, reading Alma 12 through 13, edited by my friends Matt Bowman and Rosemary Demos. And of course, all of you know why, because my good friend, Bridget Jack Jeffries, sent me 2 copies, and she wrote the final article in the paper called "And Ordained, a Priesthood of All Believers" in Alma 13. And so she sent me a copy to give away to my guests. So this month's book drawing, just remember in the description is my email, mormonbookreviews@gmail.com. And make sure you put in the subject line, July book drawing, and then give me your name and address in the email. So either way, it's good to see my friend here who was on last fall to talk about something in regards to the conference, the End of World Conference that the Community of Christ has. Evan Sharley is a member of the Community of Christ and very active in the group. Very active as a person who is an advocate, and a progressive advocate, a person within the church. And Evan has been really doing, even you've just been in the church for a couple of years now, right? Hasn't it been about 1.5 years, 2 years?
A little over 2 years.
Yeah, so it's been about 2 years, and you've made quite an impact on the church because you get a lot of people talking, that's for sure. And you've moved the ball. And so I just want to thank Evan, Sharley. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks. It's wonderful to be here again.
So part of the reason I asked Evan to come on was because you are going to be giving a talk later this month at Sunstone, and it has to do with polyamory and the Community of Christ. And that's basically the what the panel discussion is going to be about. But before we go there, I actually want to just kind of talk a little bit about your background, Evan. So maybe just talk a little bit about yourself. Now, last time you were on my program, we didn't really talk about gender and sexuality as something you didn't really feel like you wanted to talk about at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to talk about it here. But before we do that, I just want to just tell people a little bit about your background, where you were born, and then what ultimately led you to convert to the Community of Christ.
I am Evan. I was born in Boise, Idaho, which is still where I live. I was raised LDS. I ended up reading the CES letter a couple of weeks before I turned 21, and I read it all in just one sitting, and it was kind of game over for my faith at that point. But I have always had a very rich connection to spirituality. And so after I left the LDS Church, I ended up studying Buddhism for a couple of years. And I actually studied to become a Buddhist minister, and I was actually ordained. If you know Noah Rasheta from the Secular Buddhism podcast, he was one of my teachers for that course, which was wonderful. But after I got ordained, it just didn't feel like home. The restoration is really my home.
Okay.
And, there wasn't a place for me in the LDS Church, so I tried to look at some of the other restoration churches. And ultimately, I found Community of Christ and fell in love with it. And here I am. I was one of the first people that was confirmed over Zoom, which was really fun. So my confirmation service is on YouTube, and I watch it every couple of months because it's so meaningful to me. And yeah, I've been here in Community of Christ, causing some waves, which seems to be what I do.
And I want to talk about this. We'll do a follow-up from our last episode when you came on to talk about the Universal Scripture resolution that you wanted to pass at the World Conference this past spring. And basically what I wanted to do was to basically digitize all of the scriptures of the Community of Christ, and so that people would have access to all the scriptures. And it was voted down. I just, before we talk about the conversation why we're going to have you on, I just wanted you to kind of give us what happened and what's the future of the Universal Scripture resolution.
So The main pushback that was received regarding the Universal Scripture Access Resolution was finance allocation. People thought it was going to cost too much. And I knew that that would probably be the hill that it would die on if it did die, which of course it did. But I didn't go to World Conference in order to defend it, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a little while regarding my reasons why. But I personally don't think the financial aspect was as big of a concern as people really understood it to be. Several of the other Josephite churches, such as the Restoration branches, have had all of the scriptures, including the inspired version up to Doctrine and Covenants section 144, and the Book of Mormon online since the mid-90s.
And these
And
are
so the
much
fact,
smaller groups, right? So you would think if it's going
yes,
to be an expense thing, that these groups would be less likely to do it, and Community of Christ would be more likely to do it. So it sounds to me like that was kind of almost like a cover, or would you say? I mean, because it doesn't seem like the expenses would have been that high.
it's kind of interesting because there are individuals such as myself who are willing to put in the footwork to do this for free as a labor of love. But the church seemed to be focused on it must be done by a church employee, and we have to pay someone to do it. And so that combination led to, ultimately, I think it not getting passed.
I see. Huh. Now, and it is interesting because actually, I remember you were very excited about going to World Conference, and you thought it was really cool that here you are as an individual member, goes through the process, goes up the ladder to then ultimately get accepted to be something that would be submitted at the World Conference. So here you are, you were planning on going, and I remember that I remember not long before, I don't remember exactly how long before, but you basically told me that you weren't going to be going. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in order to really explain that, I have to go back a little bit more and explain a little bit more about myself. So I am polyamorous. And what that means is I have more than one partner at a time. So I am married to my wife, and then I also have a non-binary partner. And the three of us are actually in a relationship together.
Okay.
And I also see a girl every once in a while, not quite as serious as my wife and my non-binary partner. But so I kind of have three partners.
Okay.
And that is polyamory. Everybody is fully equal. My wife is free to see other people. My non-binary partner is free to see other people. And this girl that I've been seeing is free to see other people. And she's actually engaged to someone. And everybody knows, and everybody's fine, and everybody's happy. We go to dinner together sometimes. It's a lot of fun. And so that's polyamory. I'm polyamorous. Now, that being said, there was someone who came out as polyamorous in Community of Christ last fall. And I won't go too into the weeds, into the details about it, because it's not quite my story to tell. But the church reacted very negatively to them coming out of the closet as a member of the priesthood. And their congregation rallied around this polyamorous person and really defended them and said, no, they're a fantastic minister. We don't want their priesthood to be taken away, which was what was being talked about. Things settled down for a couple of months, but in February, I was told by one of my friends that the first presidency of Community of Christ had created a policy which specified that polyamorous individuals could not be a part of priesthood. And so I took that as polyamorous people are unworthy of serving. They're unworthy of being leaders in the community. And that really hurt. I I was really worried that something like that would happen. And so in November, I actually mailed a letter to each member of the First Presidency, literally begging them not to create a policy like this. And to this day, I have not received a response from them.
Hmm.
Um, I kind of take that policy that they ended up releasing as their response to me. And so I felt incredibly, incredibly hurt by this policy. And I didn't know if I was going to remain in Community of Christ. And so because of that, I took a couple of steps backwards from Community of Christ for a couple of months and did a lot of soul searching, a lot of writing to see if I really wanted to stay here. And that period just happened to include World Conference. And so I didn't know if I was going to stick around, and I didn't want to spend a couple $1,000s to fly out for a church that I didn't know if I was going to continue to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of why I didn't end up going to World Conference.
Right. So I guess since we're talking about it, I also just let's have this conversation.
Mhm.
So when I first interviewed you last year, you had at the time identified as being gender fluid.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of terms that you're going to be using. And I'd like for you to kind of, because not
Yes.
everybody's familiar with the terminology, and all, people are still kind of navigating this world. So perhaps, okay, I just, so, and then at the time you identified as gender fluid, and then now you identify as a woman, right? So,
Correct.
and you also identify as polyamorous. Now, let me just ask you a few questions. Have you, when you say you're polyamorous, is this like, would you say you were always polyamorous, or is this just part of something of your sexuality that's kind of you've been exploring recently? I'm just kind of curious. Have you have a history of dating or having multiple people in your life? I just want to understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. So that question, there's no universal answer, even
Okay.
among polyamorous folks. There are some people, such as myself, that believe it's more of an orientation.
Okay.
Um, in high school, I always had crushes on multiple people at the same time, and I
Okay.
always felt a little guilty for having crushes on multiple people. Um, I finally came to terms that I am polyamorous when I think I was 21 or 22.
Okay.
I'm 29 now.
Okay.
So it's been a while.
Okay. So now, look, so now let's talk about gender and sexuality, because
Yes.
in high school, um, you said you had multiple. You were attracted. I'm assuming you were attracted to both males and females. What I'm assuming.
On speaking broadly, I tend to be more attracted to feminine folks.
Okay.
Um, whether that's male or female
Okay.
or none of the above.
Okay.
More feminine folks is
So,
who I tend to be more
so
attracted to.
how would you have identified in high school?
As um, growing up LDS, a lot of that kind of stuff
Right.
went unexamined for me.
True. Yep.
We mentioned, I was even still going through a lot of my gender exploration the last time we talked, which is
Right.
why we didn't talk about it too
Right.
much. Um, you know, it's interesting really coming to know myself, not necessarily who society expected me to be or wants me to be, but who I am and who I want to be and everything like that. And so it's been a long, arduous journey of self-exploration. I ended up figuring out kind of my sexuality before I figured out my gender identity.
Okay.
For some people, those are connected. For other people, such as myself, they're not really connected.
Okay. So now I'm curious, because people who are transgender often at a very young age identify that, but when you were younger, how did you view yourself then? Or I'm just curious because so often I hear, that like, oh, I knew I was gay when I was 5, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know what, as a child, how did you view yourself? What were you? I'm really curious about that.
It's something that just went completely unexamined in my
Okay.
life. There were things that were just expected of me, and I just did what was expected of me until I kind of took a step back and said, is this really who I am, what I want, and everything like that? And that only happened a couple years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Now
And
I'm
so I know a lot of folks do say, I knew from a very young age. That's not a universal experience for everyone. A lot of people, such as myself, it takes, decades of soul searching and really time and life experience to really have that self-awareness to come to terms and explore that.
okay.
So
And
everybody's different.
no, that's actually I think that's a valid thing you're saying, and so I'm just trying to, yeah. And then, did you serve a mission by chance?
I did not.
Okay. What
Yeah.
what do you mind me asking why you didn't serve a mission?
So I got married at the age of 18 um,
Oh,
to my ex-wife. Her and I ended up getting divorced when we were 25. I tell people nowadays I really don't recommend getting married at 18.
what's yeah, I had no idea you were married that young. What I'm just curious, what made you decide at the age of 18 to get married?
There were a couple of factors. Admittedly, one of them was we wanted to have sex, and we weren't allowed to have sex outside of marriage, and so we got married.
So you could have
And
sex. Yeah.
and so we stayed together for 5, 6 years, and we grew up and we kind of came to know ourselves a little bit better, and we realized we weren't as compatible as we were when we started dating. And to clarify, her and I only dated for 4 months as well,
Yeah.
in true Mormon fashion,
Right.
you might
Yeah.
say.
So I'm curious, at the age of 18, when you got married, how would you have identified yourself?
When I was 18, I understood myself to be straight, monogamous, and male,
Huh.
which is funny because I don't identify as any of those things now. But it was one of those things, again, where it just went unexamined in my life. I had never really taken the time to sit with myself and sit with the concepts of masculinity and femininity, monogamy and non-monogamy. And when I did, I gave myself permission to not necessarily do what I had always done before, or what had always been expected of me before. And I'm so much happier now.
Okay. Huh.
It's a good life.
Okay. Well, okay. Okay. And so, um, yeah, thank you for sharing this information with me, because I think it's important for us to hear just like your personal story.
Definitely.
It's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around it a little bit, only because 18, getting married, that I just heard that for the first time. But
Yeah.
also how just 11 years ago, when you got married, you would have considered yourself to be a straight, monogamous male.
Hmm.
And now you're not, like you said, you're neither. You're none of that, which is
Hmm.
fascinating, because this 11-year journey that you've been on, and probably shorter than that, because you were probably figuring things out. When did you start realizing, at what age did you start realizing that maybe you weren't a straight monogamous male?
Um, so I like to tell folks, leaving the LDS church leaves you in a place where you feel like you need to re-examine every facet of
Okay.
reality.
Okay.
Um, and my religious transition out of the LDS church was rather quick as well. I actually celebrate February 6th as the day that I left the LDS church, and I was actually confirmed into Community of Christ on February 6th, because that date has such significance to me. And so it was really around the time that I was 20, 21 that I really started exploring this a little bit more. The first thing I really started exploring was my sexuality. Um, I had always been, attracted to multiple people, like I've said, but I also found boys to be cute and girls to be cute, and people who identified as neither a boy nor a girl cute. And so traditionally, I've identified myself as bisexual. Um, the label pansexual would also apply to me. Um, but yeah, and so it's been a wild ride.
Yeah,
In my adult life, I just keep asking why. Like a toddler in some regards, asking why, and asking those probing questions has gotten me in trouble with some institutions and some people, but it's brought me a lot of insight into my life, into my human existence, and everything like that. And it's brought me a lot of fulfillment as a result.
so a few months ago, I get a call, I get something on Messenger contact me, says, Steve, I need to talk to you. I'm like, do you have a few minutes? I'm like, okay, let's hop on. And we hopped on the video call. And my friend, who's been on my program, and he's a good friend, um, said, I just came out to my family as pansexual. So I went to him and said, well, let me hear your story. And then I said, okay, now let's backtrack. I said, tell me, define what a pansexual is. So I'm going to ask you, for my audience's sake, what is a pansexual?
So to me, pansexual means someone's gender identity isn't the most important aspect of your attraction to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it means, you don't like someone because they're a boy, or you don't like someone because they're a girl, or because they're neither. Um, those can be factors. Like I said, I tend to like more feminine folks. But it isn't, the whole picture.
My friend, he told me, he said that the reason why he identified as pansexual is because he started dating non-binary people.
Mm-hmm.
And so in one sense, his sexuality was kind of defined by the people that he was dating, their sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So I that's kind of what I took out of it. Is that kind of how you would describe it?
Yeah, I always tell people gender and sexuality is so intricate and so individual and everything like that. And we have these labels and these terms to try to convey broad concepts, broad experiences, but sometimes they fall short.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, this a lot of this is new terminology. I have a few friends that I know that are pansexual, and I've never really explored it. Partly because I'm just
Mhm.
so busy with this channel. I'm overwhelmed with so much information. I can't like
Yeah,
go down these paths, and so that's why I just come on my program. Let's talk about it.
absolutely.
So I guess the question now is that there are people who are watching this episode who are conservative members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Mhm.
And they're going to be saying, look what happens when a church goes progressive, like the Community of Christ. And again, I'm not saying this is an attack on you. I'm just saying how they might perceive it. That this is what happens when churches go progressive, that now not only do they want to have gay marriage and stuff like that, that's recognized in the church, but now the next step is that they'd want the church to recognize polyamorous relationships. That would kind of be used as an argument against the Utah branch going in a progressive direction if you're a conservative. I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here. In their sense, they would see that and they would look at you as being a threat or the future of the LDS church, and that's why they wouldn't want to embrace gay marriage in their church. Is that a concern to you, that maybe some people might use you in your crusade against recognizing same-sex marriages in the LDS church?
I have largely left the LDS church behind. Um, it doesn't play a big factor in my life anymore. I'm more focused on my life as it is here and now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's a little interesting that you point to me as representative of Community of Christ, because
In one sense, you're not, but they would look at you as being the next step, that you're going to be taking the Community of Christ into this direction. This is kind of the inevitability of what they would see a progressive church doing. So, because I wouldn't be surprised that 5-10 years from now that these things polyamorous relationships would be recognized by the church. Because if I look at like a Protestant church that I actually attended a few weeks ago, called the MCC, Metropolitan Community Churches, which is a gay affirming church. I was founded by a gay man, a gay Pentecostal in the 1960s. And that church would be, of course, would be okay with polyamorous relationships. So I think that I can see the Community of Christ going the MCC direction eventually. So does that make sense?
Yes. And Steve, I hope you're right.
Okay.
From where I'm sitting, I am not as confident.
Okay, then that's the thing you brought up to me, is that you are concerned. Because one, you send a letter to the first presidency, you don't hear back from them. They put out this statement that no, that you can't be polyamorous and be a priesthood holder. Do you think this also has to stem with the historical the situation with the church, which has been always from the very beginning against polygamy, and because they're against polygamy, that they don't want to open the floodgates, because if you allow for polyamorous relationships within the Community of Christ, then why would they? How can they stop people from engaging in polygamy? Maybe could that be a concern that they have?
I actually think that is what is at the heart
Okay.
of what I'm experiencing right now. A lot of the Nauvoo era trauma that was inflicted because of polygamy that has largely just gone unaddressed. Community of Christ for a very, very long time denied that, Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And all of the horrific abuses that went into that. It's only been within the last couple of decades that they have tentatively started to recognize that that did happen. And so they look at relationships such as my own, which are not polygamist, and they see cosmetic similarities and they assume that it's the same thing. And from what I have experienced thus far, I feel like they are not interested in hearing about the relationships that I have. They don't want to hear about my family, which hurts because my family means a lot to me. And so we to circle back around, I decided that I wanted to do a panel at Sunstone where I can talk about my experience of what it means to be polyamorous in Community of Christ, what it means to be polyamorous, such as myself, and kind of what I would like to see from Community of Christ, because thus far, I have not received much in the way of hope that Community of Christ will affirm my family.
So what would that look like? Because when people think of marriage, they look at it as being a ceremony and the church is blessing this union.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that you would want to have like a particular something within the church's liturgy where they would have a blessing on polyamorous families and couples, or not couples but families? I mean, how would this look? What would them recognizing you and what would that look like?
I would eventually like to see that. I don't think that we're there yet.
Okay.
What I really think we need to do as a church is just have a discussion. Just talk and learn about polyamorous folks, polyamorous families such as my own. In the early 2000s, Community of Christ did what we call listening circles.
Okay.
And the goal of the listening circles was to hear about gay and lesbian and transgender experiences, to normalize them a little bit, to remove some of that mystery and mystique, and show that, they're just people that want the same things that everybody does: love, acceptance, and community. And I would love to see more initiative from the world church to be open to listening circles with polyamorous folks so that we can have conversations about what our shared future is going to look like.
So at this point, even for you, the first step is actually for them to listen to you,
Mm-hmm.
and then have a conversation with them, and have them listen, and then you listen to them, and have this open-ended conversation with each other. So that would be the first step. Let me ask you, let's say they afford you that, and they genuinely sit down and want to hear what your story and try to understand your story and who you are, and they still decide not to recognize your polyamorous relationship. Would you at least feel better that they at least took the time to listen? Or, I mean, because you understand what I'm saying? Like even if they afforded you that, but they don't give you the answer that you want, what would be next then for you to do?
I have faith that we as a people would be able to discern a more inclusive path forward, especially if we are in dialogue with one another. Um, the theological framework of Community of Christ is so wonderful, and I love it. And I feel like it could be inclusive of polyamorous families such as myself. But if the church ultimately decides that it doesn't want to, I may have to move on
Okay.
in my spiritual path. That being said, there are some movements um, in Community of Christ that may indicate that um, polyamorous acceptance and even these dialogues may take place on a more localized level first. One of the resolutions that just passed at World Conference, I forget what the number is now, but I believe it was G7 before it was officially passed. This resolution specified that the apostles of the church, who were in charge of different apostolic fields, can help set these definitions and have these conversations more on a localized level, which very much is in line with Doctrine and Covenants, section 164, verse 7, which permitted national conferences, which permitted the LDS or Community of Christ to be accepting of LGBT folks on a nation by nation basis. As a whole, Community of Christ does not accept LGBT folks. It's a nation by nation basis that's the case.
Okay. And so you're thinking perhaps it could be done on a more local level and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. Yeah, this is quite an interesting thing because, like, you want you want to stay within the restoration. You feel that that is your home, and so that's why when people go and there are people who say, well, why just leave or whatever. Well, this is that you found what you feel is your church home, and you
Mm-hmm.
want to, and you feel in your mind that by doing what you're doing the advocacy that you're doing, that you're going to make your church a better church, a more inclusive church, for all different people from marginalized groups and stuff like that, and that you're basically just pushing the progress that the church made a decision, a few decades ago to go in a progressive direction, and you're
Mm-hmm.
just saying, well, we just got to keep following this path that we chose to go down, and so for you, it's just inevitable that it would, and of course, happen, and you do, you know. I guess for me, I do want to ask you this, on a spiritual level, there are probably people in the Community of Christ that have been very helpful to you. Maybe talk about some of the people that have been supportive of you and the role that the people of the Community of Christ have played in helping you on this journey as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, the growing up, I never felt really truly included in a spiritual community.
Okay.
Um, and just having people that have my back now means more than anyone could know. I'm trying not to tear up right now. But like there are people that like I just broke down ugly crying to regarding what we call the February policy, this policy that the first presidency came out with to kind of harken back to the LDS Church's November policy in terms of how it's made a lot of people feel. Um, People that are willing to stand up and say this isn't right, and willing to risk their own, reputations in a lot of cases. They're willing to stand with the marginalized. Those people are inspiring to me. And they're good people, and Community of Christ is full of good people. I have met more octogenarians who are fully supportive of every facet of my identity in Community of Christ than I have anywhere else in my entire life, which is incredible.
And that's why you want to
Because
stay. That's this because you have the great support network that you have in the Community of Christ is there.
yeah.
So it does. So let me ask you a question. What if, sometimes, I mean, you're still young, you're in your 20s, right? And sometimes people, when they're young, they just want it all now. I want it all now. But are you one of those people that's willing to do that, maybe has a vision that maybe this doesn't happen today and maybe doesn't happen 6 months from now, but this is something that maybe 5-10 years from now, the church will eventually come around to it? Are you willing to go and do like a long view approach on this? Or do you feel like this is something you want the church to address right away?
I Community of Christ is a bit unique, different from the LDS Church. Community of Christ has claimed to have about 250,000 members since the mid 80s. Now, it's a pretty common statistic that about a third of Community of Christ left once we canonized D&C 156, which recognized that women can be part of priesthood.
And this was in 1984, and that's when we kind of had a
1984.
split off happening with the church at that time.
It took less than 15 years for the first women apostle to be ordained. We are now at about that same time frame, and we have not had, in regards to D&C 164, and we have not had an LGBT apostle ordained yet. And It's not even clear if that's going to happen or not. And so I feel like Community of Christ has kind of overcorrected in some regards, and they're taking too long in comparison to the precedents that we have in our past. Now, that being said, I would like to see it sooner rather than later, selfishly. But I do also recognize that these things take time. One thing I am worried about is, like I said, Community of Christ claims 250,000. We can remove 30% right off the top of that, because those people left and they're never coming back, because they went and started their own churches. The Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Restoration branches, all are results of that schism. On top of that, Community of Christ is also experiencing what every other Christian church is experiencing, where millennials such as myself are increasingly choosing not to affiliate with them. I actually did a historical survey regarding some of the demographics of the delegates of Community of Christ. And I found some pretty shocking statistics. For example, in 2016, 27% of delegates to Community of Christ's World Conference were under the age of 50, compared to 72% over the age of 50. In 2023, it's only 14% are under the age of 50, and 85% are over the age of 50.
Yeah.
And so this is illustrating that the younger folks are leaving. And so there may not be as long of a term as some people hope that there will be.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, this is the thing. We're seeing the same trend in all the mainline Protestant denominations in particular. We're seeing the same trend. It's getting older and older, and that where the growth is with young people is in the evangelical churches. Now, The evangelical churches has their issues too. People are leaving the evangelical church, but those churches skew much younger. That's one of the things when I go to, like there's mega churches all over the place here, and those are all for families. It's mostly for young people. So the evangelical world kind of caters to the younger people, younger families, and stuff like that. And the mainline churches, whether I go to a Methodist church, the MCC church, the local Community of Christ here that I gave a sermon at last year, they all, I would describe them all as being over 85%, 50 and above in all those places. So this is an issue that mainline progressive churches are also having, is that the people are aging out and the kids are not. Why is it? I'm just curious. Why is it that kids in particular are leaving progressive mainline churches?
This is something that people much smarter than I study as a profession. We're getting into sociology type stuff here.
Yeah.
This theory that we're describing, though, is, I believe, called the strict church theory. There's a channel on YouTube called Religion for Breakfast that's run by a PhD, religious studies PhD.
Yeah, I've seen some.
And he did a whole video on this. At the end of the day, I don't think religions can truly compete in the marketplace of community anymore. And why? So a lot of folks are saying, why would I come here when I can get that community that I crave over here without any of this baggage?
Okay. Yeah.
And it's that's happening in Community of Christ as well.
So tell us again, what is the name of this panel that you're going to be at Sunstone? Who's all going to be participating in it, and when will it be happening?
So the formal name of the panel is Faithful Disagreement, Polyamory and Community of Christ.
Okay.
It will be on Sunstone Saturday, which I believe is July 29th.
Okay.
It is at 9:25 a.m. Mountain Time, and it'll be myself and my friend Elle Mills Warner, who was a member of Community of Christ, but she actually resigned from Community of Christ in light of the February policy.
Okay.
So it's going to be us two, and we're going to be up there talking for about an hour. We have about 5 questions outlined at this point. And we also anticipate there being a Q&A.
Okay, so who's moderating the panel?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
we had someone volunteer to be a moderator, a member of Community of Christ, but they, just so you know, I have gotten quite a lot of pushback regarding this panel, making people aware of this panel. I have been removed from a couple of Facebook groups, and because of this, which is unfortunate that my advocacy is doing this. But
and you were throwing out some Facebook groups. I remember your things have been happening, and you had actually talked to me about this before, that part of you is actually kind of concerned that you might actually end up getting excommunicated over this.
Truth be told, I am a little worried. I am vocal about my family, the worth and dignity of my family, and I'm not willing to compromise on that. And I'm willing to point out where and how people are diminishing the worth of my family, and I won't tolerate it. And I want to stay in this community as long as I can because it's my home, but I fear that they won't let me stay, which kind of, it sucks.
Okay. But, it's so fascinating to me because, of course, on my channel, I have faithful members of the church on Utah branch, and I do have critics come on. This is one of the first few times I've actually had a critic of the Community of Christ, or somebody who's critical of some of the stuff that's happening with the Community of Christ. It was kind of different from my channel, but hey, this is the place where we have those conversations. I can have Lachlan Mackay, I can have John Hamer and other people from the wonderful people from Community of Christ.
All great folks.
Yeah, they're all great people. And I really actually love the Community of Christ. I find it to be a wonderful people. And like I said, I gave a sermon at one of their services last year. So I have a real close attachment. to that as well. But this is the 21st century Community of Christ. What direction is your church going to go? And folks, I'd like for you to leave in the description or in the comments. Give me your thoughts, and then share with Evan what you think. What do you think of polyamory and all these kind of things, and maybe these pansexual. Some of these things may be terms that you haven't even heard before. So maybe maybe talk about what you kind of learned from this episode. Maybe this can be instructive wherever you are at in the spectrum of the restoration. I hope that this is a conversation where you can get people to listen and reach out and have these conversations, and that's what you really want to start, is initiate an adult conversation that's done in a Christ-like way.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping that my panel is going to be one of the first steps in a long conversation that we start having.
Okay. Well, hopefully this will be the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear what y'all have to say. So this is a preview. You get to see before Sunstone what Evan's going to be presenting about. And so if you are at Sunstone, I'm going to try to make it out there. So make sure you say hi to me. Make sure you say hi to Evan. And before I let you go, Evan, was there anything else you wanted to share with my audience?
Come see me at Sunstone. It'll be great.
All right. Go see him. Go see Evan at Sunstone. All right, folks. Well, this was an interesting episode, and I want to thank you so much for coming on. You're one of those people that I remember when we first started communicating to each other on Reddit and didn't even know your real name. And so we've actually been in communication for about as long as I've been doing this channel. So it's kind of cool that we've kind of grown together in that way. So, well, folks, tell us what you thought. Remember, don't forget that our merch store, MormonBookReviews.com, we have merchandise, hats and T-shirts, and of course, even got we got the mouse pads and everything here. So if you want to financially support the channel that way, that'd be great. Or there are also places where you can support us on Venmo, as well as PayPal, as well as for those of you who'd like to be patrons for the channel. And I want to thank everybody who's contributing to the channel. It really helps keep things going. And just remember, the most important thing is this, folks, is this. Remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.